It's a pleasure to be with you today. See some familiar faces, see some familiar faces. I don't want to say old faces because
Some are old.
I'm 70. I'm 73, still doing it. I remember when I first started doing this, I was living in New Jersey, so it was a bus ride in or a car ride in. Now I live in Florida, land of the free, since 2014. As usual, I have a lot to cover because there's a lot going on. And just think about the last couple of weeks. One, you had a hurricane that ravaged North Carolina and took down 70% of the saline supply in the United States. You know, before that, there had a tornado hit Wilson, North Carolina, sterile injectable, wiped that planet. You had opioids. You had arrest made in an opioid case, pill mills back in Houston, Texas, and Pensacola, Florida. And when I saw the news, to Wholesale RX, I talked to the Wholesale Association. Do you know these people? They didn't. And the question is, how in this day and age did they get their supply? Is it legitimate supply? How in this day and age with all this drug monitoring, how did they get it? So, and then you had the CEO of CVS step down. You had the Walgreens announcing they're closing 1,200 stores. Rite Aid is in bankruptcy. And so this system is very fragile right now, with health care providers going on to retiring and so forth. So I got a lot to cover. I'm going to first talk about, these are some of the industry challenges. Inflation Reduction Act. I was just in an ecology meeting last week, and it's commonly known as the Innovation Reduction Act, not the Inflation Reduction Act, because it's going to stifle innovation. Second, Drug Supply Security Act, that was 10 years in the making. It was supposed to be implemented this year, delayed again until next year. That's to secure the supply chain. Drug shortages, we'll talk a little bit about. Abandonment, all the work that people do to get people on prescriptions. On many chronic medications, only 31% of the people that actually started on that prescription are ending up taking it at the end of the year. So there's a lot of challenges there. Biosimilars, I'm concerned about the fragility of the biosimilar business because all the players went into 3 different markets: oncology, immunology, and eye. And there's a lot of untapped opportunity in biologics and biosimilars because generics created financial headroom to pay for innovation. We're expecting biosimilars to do the same. I've got some doubts about that. DIR changes, reimbursement challenges. One of the reasons that retail pharmacies under stress is that they lose money in every GLP-1 prescription they dispense, every one. Second is that the DIR fees, which is direct and indirect remuneration, went to retrospective or prospective instead of retrospective. And then you had the cyber attack that decimated the system for about 3 weeks. So that really put a lot of independent pharmacies and other chain pharmacies under duress. Staffing issues in hospitals, pharmacies, nurse practitioners, you have it. And just to show you how this world has changed, is they were building pharmacy schools left and right 10 years ago. Now they're starting to not fill them up. And then store closures, and we'll be talking probably about pharmacy deserts in the future. Now, I wanted to take you through a few charts out of our Institute of Medicine's report that we come out with every April or May. And one of the interesting things we did during COVID, we put together what we call a health services utilization index. We first did this in 2020 before COVID. This one is 2022 to end of 2023. And you see there's 5 things listed there that have an index on them. And the only one that's indexed higher is new prescriptions. What's indexed lower is office institutional telehealth visits. So people aren't going to the doctors as much as they did before. One that concerns me most is screenings. 94% people are not getting their screenings. You know, the pap smears or mammograms, PSA tests, and that's going to be a much bigger problem going forward. Elective procedures, that's never recovered since COVID. It may be because it took 1.4 million people out that would be candidates for elective procedures. And then a big concern now on vaccinations, because some people will have this vaccine hesitancy caused by COVID. Even though that they did rise to the occasion to get the RSV vaccines when they came out. But you start to see measles starting to appear around the country again. Polio is back. You know, so there's a fine line there. So got some concerns about that. There's 6 things that we pulled out of the report. That was drug shortages, which I'll talk a greater amount. Is that the shortages are particularly on generics. They're also tend to be on injectables, and they're not being resolved. It might have something to do with it might be a bigger problem going forward with drug inspections being way down from where they were prior to COVID. And this DSCA, if it gets implemented next year, some people say, I'm not going to be ready, I'm just going to pull out. So that's a concern amount. Opioid epidemic, the use is down. I'll show you a chart a little bit later on that, but we're back to the use that we saw what we call morphine of milligram equivalents in the level of 2011. Yet overdose deaths are going up. It's primarily fentanyl and methamphetamine and things of that sort. Another interesting thing is contraceptive use. Contraceptive use is down 3%. And what's going in the other direction is emergency contraceptive up and sterilizations up 35 and 11% respectively. So figure that one out. The other one is growing use of immunology treatments. And Fred probably remembers this, is that it used to be immunology, one size fit all. And now you see immunology for Crohn's disease, you see immunology for plaque psoriasis and many other indications. And so even though Humira has lost its patent and faces biosimilar competition, is that the whole franchise is growing. The next is GLP-1s, so we'll call that a separate section. That is the, probably the biggest thing that I've seen in my lifetime hit the pharmaceutical industry. And I go back to thinking about cholesterol drugs, and then HIV, and then Hep C, and then the COVID. But this one, I think, is going to be bigger. And then antibiotic use and antimicrobial resistance, I still get a kickback of what our actions were during COVID, where you were hesitant to go to the store. The stores were open, tended to be pharmacies, so I appreciate their frontline being worker status. But people would take their groceries and stuff into the garage, sanitize them in the garage before they brought them into the house. And that's not usually how COVID spread. COVID spreads aerosolally, not by touch. The next thing is this is what I'm talking about. Over half the new prescriptions are now medicines go unfilled. And here's 2 different versions. One is acute and chronic new active substances. So first of all, it's a journey to get your product through the pipe, through the FDA. So if it happens to get prescribed, it's written by a doctor. Let's say that's 100 prescriptions. 51 of those are rejected. 17 get approved by a new payer. So total approved is 65 out of the 100. So 35 not even there. Then abandoned by a patient 18%, and filled new RXs 46%. That's not a very good. If we talk about healthcare, that's if you have a medicine that works, people should take it. And then on product, you have persistency. You see, fill the new RX 100%, single fill 27, multiple fills 42, and only 31% are still on the meds at the end of the year. And this is persistent. This with Lipitor. Because Lipitor, asymptomatic drug, is that only about 31% of people are on it at the end of the year, and it's a cholesterol. Next thing, current market performance. Where are we now? First of all, the market on a invoice price basis is $756 billion. And specialty accounts for 51%, and biologics will be in specialty. And just to remind you that GLP-1s are traditional medicines, not special medicines. And remind you that this probably would have happened sooner, especially being more than 50% of the COVID hit. And the COVID medicines were traditional medicines and acute. So both specialty is growing 12.5 and traditional growing at 11.3. So they are both growing, and a lot of the traditional growth is coming from the GLP-1s. This is a total market, retail, mail, non-retail, and you see the size and the percent change versus a year ago. So the market's up 12%, mail up 13.3%. Retail up, but non-retail up 12, and retail up about 11. So all double digit. when you break out the non-retail, and that's where most of the action took place or during COVID, is that you see that in 2020, long-term care went down and hospitals went down. Long-term care went down a lot because the mortality in long-term care facilities, that's where the biggest mortality was. Represented here in New York is a cardinal example of that. There's been a recovery in long-term care. There's clinics that stay along during the whole time, and hospitals has been a bumpy road. And since we're looking at dollars, is that one product, which was the Chlorine, which is for COVID therapeutic, really influenced its numbers because it got as high as $4 billion in sales. Now it's about 500 million. Then when you look at, I'll talk about retail a little later, is that these are the compounding annual growth. So the way you read this from left to right is a 5-year compounded growth on a dollar basis, and from bottom to top, that's the 1 year. If it's blue, it's a traditional class. If it's orange, it's a specialty class. And this 45-degree angle line is if you're above that line, it means the class has momentum. If you're below the line, it means the class doesn't have momentum. So the things that are above the line are vaccines, even though there's vaccine hesitancy, probably prompted by the RSV vaccines, which were a new thing, and anti-obesity preps. And so below the line, you see HIV, oncology, immunology, diabetes, and let me just talk a little bit about HIV. A lot of generics in there. Oncology, immunology, biosimilars in there. In the anti-diabetes, you had as part of the Inflation Reduction Act, insulins are $35 now. That's taken $10 billion out of that marketplace. Now, the interesting thing to me is generally in economics, if the price of something goes down, usually the utilization goes up, but that has not happened in the case of the $35 instance. So I scratched my head on that.
Can I ask a quick question?
Yeah.
Can you go back to the previous slide? One of the things that I'm missing here is the heart failure market. I mean, it's not that Entresto is very new, but drugs like empagliflozin and it's a multi-billion-dollar drugs in the heart failure area.
Well, I think
that's the market I see there's antipsychotics. Is that not really moving the market at all? Or?
Well, sometimes you have counterbalancing, is you have some new innovation that offsets or doesn't offset lack of products that lose patent
The
expiry.
reason I'm asking is because you have antidiabetics. They all started as antidiabetics, and I don't know if packaged it in there. They all had a diabetes indication before they got a heart failure indication.
Right.
Let's save the questions at the end.
Oh, okay.
I don't want to disrupt saying it. That'll be kind of,
All right, so these are the top 10 therapy areas. So immunology, anti-diabetes, oncology, antithrombotic, respiratory, HIV, vaccine, mental health, multiple sclerosis, and the number 10 is the anti-obesity. So that is now a $13.5 billion category. You add that up to anti-diabetes, the diabetes GLP-1s is the number one category now. Is that they're softening in immunology because of biosimilars, they're softening in oncology because of the biosimilars, and you can see that most of these are growing, but you don't see anything on the heart on that. This is the price reduction on insulins down. You see its price and volume both down. So that's one I kind of scratch my head at. These are the largest retail sales. No surprise, Ozempic, Eliquis, Jardiance, Mounjaro, Trulicity, Biktarvy, Wegovy, Farxiga, Xarelto, and Trelegy. And you see that they're primarily anti-diabetes products and HIV, anti-obesity products. Here's some other ones. Here's your Entresto. And I'm going to be able to get copies of this. So Entresto is growing, and of course they're now in a patent fight to see how long that patent will continue. Now these are the ones that have the highest absolute growth, and you see that Ozempic, Mounjaro was the top top product of introduction in 2022. Zepbound was the biggest introduction in 23. You see Paxlovid, which was used for COVID. The the two vaccines, Farxiga, and some of these things will be facing either patent expiries and or IRA. Because I believe that Ozempic will be in the IRA list the next time it comes out. But I scratched my head when they picked the 10 IRA drugs the last time. 6 of them were facing generic or biosimilar competition during the time frame. So I scratched my head on that. And these are the ones that have lost the most. And generally, they've either switched to another product or they've lost their patent. You know, like Latuda, Vyvanse, Advair Discus, Symbicort, and so forth. These are the top retail products. You know, so the ACE inhibitors, you know, they're down. The calcium antagonists are up. So it's kind of a mixed bag. And just when you're entering a market, you know, you got to look at what your market is, because you see that 80% or more of the retail business is traditional, and the majority of mail is specialty, and also the majority of non-retail. And I remember back at the early days of Medco and Express Scripts, when they were in business to do 90-day scripts, and not in the specialty business, and now they dominate the specialty business. These are the top products in retail: Ozempic, Eliquis, Jardiance, Bonjoro, Trulicity, and then Humira, Stelara, Dupixent, Skyrizi, Enbrel in the male side, and then, as you expect, Keytruda, Deralex, Opdivo, Ocrevus, and another one. And I just heard this last week, and probably Fred knows this, is that I was hearing Brent Saunders, who's speaking in a meeting in Miami. And I did not know that until he said that actually Keytruda was a Schering-Plough product. And Merck bought Schering-Plough, not for Keytruda. That was kind of in the background, and it turned out to be the biggest oncology product. I'll give you another one, which is Knoll Labs, which owns Symbicort, and that's Synthroid, was bought by Abbott. And they had Knoll had another thing in their background, which is Humira. So think about it, it's 2 of the major products of today were throw-ins. So you never know, you know, what you have. New product launch date. I think this is probably going to be very important to you. So 26 launches through June. When you look at the top right, you see that 15% of those launches were immunology, 15% were anti-infectives, and 15% were digestive. And so you look at 23 and 22, all those were oncology. Oncology was the biggest innovation products. And I'm not, you know, I was just at a cancer meeting last week. There'll be one on Friday. You know, where's the oncology innovation gone? Now, maybe because it's much more crowded today than it was before. A lot of cancers are very well treated, in oncology is more the chronic disease now in many places. So Mounjaro was the top product in 22, Zepbound in 23, and really nothing of any significance in 24. So there has not been anything of a big magnitude this year versus the previous year. You can see that as the average monthly sales are down. So it's tougher, and the launch trajectory is not as high as it was before. Now on the right hand side shows you what these launches are, and they're pretty well spread out. But it used to be that oncology was the biggest place, but not necessarily so today. This is the top launches in 24. You see Octagam from Pfizer for chronic immune system, and you know, a lot of these are specialty drugs. You have dry eye disease. You have Fabry disease. You know, so some of the things that you know, Peter was talking about earlier. You know, so it's a whole mix of things, because innovation is going to more rare disease cell and gene therapies. I didn't bring with me today, but the number of clinical trials is down from what it was before, and the clinical trials of today are different. We have some reports on that that you can get more detail on. The other thing I want to talk about is that this looks at average first year gross sales per brand, all launches, and we've gone back to 2013. And this is Hep C. So the Hep C, Hep C, Hep C, Hep C. So that was the the big tsunami, a cure. Imagine a cure. Then you had here you had the COVID, other vaccines, and then GLP-1s. So saying that is if you weren't in Hep C, GLP-1s, vaccines, or COVID, the average launch sales are down for the rest of the marketplace. So that's significant. Generics and biosimilars. Is that Peter was mentioning the generic market, and I've described the generic market as the race to the bottom for some time. And I remember this is probably Brent Saunders also talked about selling his company Activist to Teva. And Teva, I think, paid $50 billion for Teva at that time, and it probably was only worth 20, more or less, because Teva was going to try to buy Mylan at the time. But things are starting to improve on a dollar basis, but that's only 5.4 and a market's growing double that. So I was just with the generic people on Monday. I said, better news, but they're doing fine on prescriptions. So you have 89.4% of all the prescriptions dispensed in the United States are unbranded generics. But that unbranded generic number translated in only 7.3% of the dollars. So think about 90% of the volume is only translating to 7.3% of the dollars, and the dollar contribution is dropping each year. Now, why is that? I think the biggest reason, 3 buyers control 91%, half owned by a wholesaler, half owned by the pharmacy, and why they want to depress prices because their margins go down at the same time. Nobody is able to answer that question for me. You have a prolific FDA, and I'll show a chart that probably Peter's familiar with, is that the FDA is approving record numbers of ANDAs, abbreviated new drug applications. Very, very prolific. The third reason is you have more players, a lot of players that come from India into the marketplace, and that's kind of changed the dynamics from what you traditionally saw versus today. Price deflation is better, so that those 3 buyers, all that more competition just depress the prices. And you can see the biggest depression was in 2022 and has recovered since then. And you see the bumpiness in 2024, and that's because they changed some of the methodology on acquisition, but not so I can't draw a blank on it, but somebody changed the definition, and it's bouncing all over the place. The next thing is that you thought it was enough when a $100 product became a $10 generic product, and since that time, these top 20 molecules have further depressed another 20% in price. And so you're at a point that it's hard to be profitable in the generic business. It's hard to keep the plants open and so forth. And that's a recipe for drug shortages. The next thing is, and probably this might be one of your bigger takeaways, is that two products, Ozempic and Humira, are bigger than the whole generic industry. 2. And that's 2 brand molecules that are bigger than almost 1,100 generic molecules. It used to be 3, before that it was 7. So think about it, two brand molecules bigger than the whole generic industry by something like $6 or $7 billion. And this is what the ANDA, so about 90% of what the FDA approves is they've approved something before. So if you've seen it once, it's easier to approve it the second time, third time, and fourth time. 10% of what they approve is new. And I'd like to see less of the Me Too's and more of the new things, because there's no room for 10 players in a generic molecule. There's probably not room for more than 5 players in the molecule. The thing is, they don't know whether they're going to be what position they're going to be in when they file. And you notice that through the time is that they get approved, but they don't launch. So it used to be 3/4 launch. Then it was 2/3. Last year it was 50%, and this year it's 23%. That's through the second quarter. So spend all this money, get a product approved, and there's no possibility for commercial return on it, and that's why they don't launch it. Next thing is biosimilars. And most of the biosimilars we saw before were on the medical benefit side. So they have done quite well in a lot of the medical benefit side, in the filgrastim, the pegfilgrastim, you know, the Remicades, the cancer drugs. The first foray they had into the pharmacy benefit side was against Humira. And if you recall, Amgen entered the market in February of 23 with a high cost, high rebate product and a low cost, low rebate product. What happened? Nothing. Then in the middle of the year, he had 5 or 6 more players get into the market. Some were actually bioequivalent. What happened? Again, nothing. And it wasn't until this year that you see something that started to happen. And what started to happen is the PBM started to partner with a biosimilar company as their preferred vendor. And that's when you start to see the inroads that they finally made into Humira. Stelara from J&J, I think, is next, and that's going to follow the same pattern. It's they'll pick a preferred provider. So this is one of the things I'm concerned about, the sustainability of biosimilars. Drug shortages. It's hard to get a good feel on trends of this because there's been some change in the reporting of drug shortages. But the drug shortages maybe slowing a bit, though the saline has caught everybody's attention. And you know, the one that you saw, the biggest was a couple of years ago, was generic carboplatin and generic cisplatin. And an India plant finally got inspected after COVID, and they actually burning records as the FDA walked into the facility. And they failed, and all of a sudden 50% of the generic and cisplatin, carboplatin was gone. Now they also happen to be the lowest cost provider, and that really caused particularly difficulty for the rural hospitals. Because the big hospitals, they can anticipate these things, they'll stock up. The rural hospitals, they don't have the buying power, and they kind of get left at the altar. So these shortages are persisting for more than 2 years. This is what they're at. And another one you probably saw with Acorn just totally went out of business, and they were the biggest majority of the children's albuterol in hospitals. And the one you probably hear the most about is the ADHD drugs. The ADHD drugs is kind of an interesting thing, and I think the FDA got more, or maybe it was the DA got more letters on that than ever before because people couldn't get their ADHD drugs. Because there's a quota on ADHD drugs, and the FDA and the DA thought there was too many being used. And the interesting thing again is who was using those ADHD drugs during COVID? Women, particularly 20 to 40 and 40 to 60, probably because they're home working and they have the kids at home and they need a little help. So they have quotas, and you have so pharmacy can only, or a wholesaler can only send so many of these drugs to different pharmacies. Well, what happens if a pharmacy closes and that patient goes to another pharmacy and there's no quota for that? So I think they finally started to alleviate that a little bit, but that's been a huge issue recently. And so 84% are generics, 67% are injectables, and 24% are orals. And that's probably because these things are so dirt cheap. It's just hard to kind of keep it all together for the generic companies. I remember giving a presentation to one of the top 5 generic companies to their board of directors, and one of the board of directors said to the chairman, "Why exactly are you getting the generic retail business? I mean, the generic institutional business is much better than the generic retail business." These are the inspections of manufacturing plants. And so this goes from 2009, and here you see that everything drops during COVID, as you would expect. But the recovery has not really happened that much. Is that particularly on the domestic side. And in China, they're up a little bit, but China used to have 151 inspections a year, 40. So that is another concern. And then this is a report that just came out that talked about 2,000 pharmacies have not, pharmaceutical facilities have not been inspected since COVID. So what are we, 2 years out after that? And that's India, that's China, that's the United States. And the inspections are down, and the challenge for the FDA is workload, is replacing is people. They have a big manpower sugar on these inspections, and that's gives me some concern at night if we think drug shortages are bad now. When they start to inspect some of these plants, what happens? And that's why I tell people you only should rely on reliable sources, that will self-inspect, so they don't get caught suddenly. Cough, cold, and flu. You can always predict kind of ours of what Australia looked like. So Australia is 6 months ahead of us, and they had about an average flu season. So I think we're having about an average flu season. This is what so you can compare this is Australia, this is the United States, so you can kind of contrast this, and these were the big ones, during during COVID. And then you have the new thing, which is the RSV vaccines, and flu vaccines are still pretty strong, but you're seeing a real decline in people getting their COVID boosters. Not a lot there. Retail class of payment and of trade. This is what retail pharmacy counts have looked like. They have declined from 58,752 in January 18 to 53,480 in June of 24, which is about 6,000. And this is even before Walgreens announced another 1,200. So CVS said they do 900, 300 per year for 3 years. Rite Aid has gone bankrupt. You got you have Walgreens closing 1,200 stores. Where I live down in Florida, Winn-Dixie sold to Aldi. Aldi doesn't operate pharmacies, so there's no pharmacies in there. So think about these pharmacies closing. How much workload goes to the next pharmacy? And if you're in those areas, you can see the workload is massive, and people are very unhappy. And so this is accelerating. And you throw another wild card in. I told you the reimbursement, the GLP-1s, or the reimbursement of GLP-1s, DIR fees, and also the cyber attack, is that this is starting to even increase. And then through another one is retail thefts. The brilliant minds in California came up with an idea. You can steal up to $950 without being arrested. So and I remember talking to my friend, think about that. I'm going to move to California. Now, if you go to Duane Reade, here, you'll see virtually everything's locked up.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
Because this retail theft. Now, retail farmers getting squeezed from both ends. The front of the store is because of the digital and all that online stuff. Back end is getting crushed by reimbursement issues. And so this is the chart that talking about pharmacy deserts. And this is, this will give a big play on the social determinants of health that we've talked about before. And generally, it's rural areas and urban areas are going to be affected the most. So in a rural area, you might have to go 40 miles instead of 20 miles to go to your local pharmacy. In an urban area, you might have to go 5 miles. And so you can see where this looks at. And then this just is an indication of the workload. So as the number of pharmacies closed, the number of prescriptions are going up, so there's more work for a pharmacy. Even though that they do more 90-day scripts, and to be viable is they're going to have to embrace all this AI as much as they can in central fill, which means they fill the prescription off-site the day before at a central location and gets shipped to the store. The prescriptions are fine. This is just one thing about all this thing that you think about is that you can try your best to get somebody to be persistent. Is there about 20% of the people never be persistent no matter what you do, and the pharmacies get money subtracted from them when people don't make their star ratings, which I think is a little bit unfair. And this is adherence. So where's the best adherence? It's third party. I'm sorry, Medicare Part D. The third party next, and adherence is pretty lousy on cash and Medicaid. And Medicaid is a particular challenge because most of those Medicaid prescriptions are free or very low cost, and they're still not adherent. So there's a lot going on there. All right, GLP-1s coming down the home stretch. So these have had huge impacts. And so this is a question, is that people taking GLP-1s, 51% of them reduced their grocery spend, 51%. Their average market basket went down 11%. So what are they having less of? Snacks and confectionery, prepackaged baked goods, soda and sugary beverages. I don't understand the alcoholic beverage part because I tend to have more of that processed food. And then what's more, the protein, meat replacements, healthy snacks, and so forth. So the world is changing. And so the GLP market is increased tremendously, $81 billion. It will be $100 billion early next year. And it's a retail-oriented class. So most of those prescriptions are in retail, some in mail and some in non-retail. Partly is that if it's mail, it's got to be shipped refrigerated because these need to be refrigerated. You have there's some independents don't want to fill these, so it's changed, and it's mostly 30-day scripts. As a lot of the pharmacies are reluctant to fill 90-day scripts because they're so expensive. And then the obesity gold rush is on. So there's 120 of them in development right now.
Wow.
And there's a little bit of herd. You think there's a little herd mentality?
No. Never happens before.
And the one that's supposed to come next to the market, I think, is from Amgen. I don't know. I think it's in the next few months. But it's interesting, they're coming on the market at the time that Ozempic is probably going to the IRA, and some of these GLP-1s are starting to lose their patents. So it's going to be, they're going to have generics in the GLP-1 marketplace in the not too different future. Opioids. So this is the opioid prescription opioid deaths. And we all kind of come through this, and you can see that it was going down, and then during COVID, just like ADHD drugs, people needed stuff, and now it's kind of really coming down again, and only about 10% of the overdose deaths come from prescription narcotics. And you see what's up is fentanyl. Fentanyl, stimulants, cocaine, and you see heroin and prescription opioids going in the opposite direction. Fentanyl now over 70% of the overdose deaths. And prescription opioids, less than 10% of the deaths. And as I was talking before lunch, is that people that overdose generally did not have a prescription for it in the first place. They got it, they took it from a friend or relative for free, bought it from a friend off the market. So only 38.6% have got from one doctor. So it's an interesting dynamic. All right, outlook. First thing is that this is a little different version because this is on net spending when you put the rebates in. And you still see that obesity and the vaccines will set themselves apart. There's still plenty of opportunity in oncology, immunology, diabetes, although the diabetes category is very heavily discounted, infectious disease, and so forth. So, and the bigger the ball, the bigger the class. So we think that obesity and oncology will help drive growth for the next few years. And these are the patent expiries. So $61 billion in biologics and $33 billion on small molecules. Because the biological market has grown, it's matured, and now you're starting to see biosimilars coming into the spot. But as I said, most people are going after 3 different target areas. You're better off not going where everybody else is going and go other places. Pharmacy services, the role of pharmacy continues to expand, and I think we're looking at the shortage of practitioners is the closer we can get to the patient, the better off we are. And so they can do immunizations, they can do naloxone services, and there's still plenty of opportunity if we let them do that. And that's the big question. Okay, so here's the kind of the key takeaways, and since I can't stick around for the final session because I got to get home. I've been on the road for 3 weeks, 15 flights or something like that. Elective procedure and screens have not fully recovered. You could throw in vaccine hesitancy on that as well, and physician visits. The telehealth one is interesting because at one time it was about 20% of all the medical claims during COVID, and now it's kind of specialized. So you see a lot of telehealth for GLP-1s and sexual things. Drug shortages are mainly on generics that have been going on for some time. Launches are not as successful in today's landscape, and generics are slower to enter the market. GLP-1s, we talked about that impact. The biosimilars, Humira, are finally making some headway. We talked about that abandonment, which is a problem. Med D is a driver of growth. Generic deflation is slowing. The diabetes category is being impacted by reduced insulin prices. Pharmacists continue to create to create a challenge for the most needy, and especially continues to grow. And I think another thing, the last thing is to look at the battle between the FTC and the 3 PBMs. Is how that's going to play out. And so FTC is suing the 3 PBMs, 3 PBMs are suing FTC. And the thing that I would say, just in closing, is that, as Peter was right, is that pharmaceuticals really came through during COVID, and the reputation of manufacturers really improved. Now we're kind of being back in the camp of being designed. The interesting thing, this thing that inflated the most over the last 10 years is hospital care. And you don't hear a peep about the cost of hospital care because that's the biggest employer in every congressional district. It's the hospital in that congressional district. I lost my train of thought. So, and so the pharmaceutical benefit, or the rebates that are paid, where do they go? They go back to the plan sponsor, primarily about 90%. Yeah. And what are they used for? Offset healthcare premiums. And so it's a kind of a balancing act. You change things on one side, other things are going to go up, and they'll probably be, when the premiums go up, they'll again blame the pharmaceutical industry, and that they shouldn't at all. So with that, thank you for your kind attention, Abby, and instantly.